got distracted. I've been having some hard times in this crazy town. Baby Huey and the babysitters. Anybody up on that? Y'all not ready for that. Okay. Where are we? We won't be long today, but we will be strong. And to the best of our abilities, avoid being wrong. Welcome to the BroDiallo broadcast. Jump in with both feet. I've been out of town all week, man, and I'm not a traveler. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I love to travel and woo, woo, woo. I'm not really a traveling dude, man. I hate to admit this about myself, but I imagine, not that I ever have done it, I could live the entirety of my life in probably like a 3-mile, 4-mile radius. You know, just my woman, I was gonna say, let me just not see. I was about to list things to make myself look good, but if I'm gonna be honest, the simple pleasures of life, my woman. I was gonna say my kids, but that's not honest. I wouldn't want them in my 5-mile radius bubble. You know, some land to grow food on, access to good music, a good roots reggae joint. You know, just simple things in a simple life. But I was traveling. I was out of town all week. Last week, just got back this weekend, and Chicago. It was a boiling cauldron, and I like the heat. I'm a tropical dude, man. I am a tropical dude, so you won't ever catch me complaining about the heat directly. So if I complain about the heat, it's indirect. But I was out of town and I had a good time. And it's a place, because all this week, I thought we were going to Detroit, Michigan, but we ended up in Lansing, Michigan for the SCRA conference. And I let me tell you, I creeped on a come up. Your boy came up, man. I was on the Michigan State campus. And let me tell you something weird about Michigan State. It's a college town above all our college town. I thought Lawrence, Kansas, where the campus of KU was the college town, the quintessential college town where everything revolves around it. Because I used to go to Lawrence, Kansas, because KU would bring all like the independent, underground, hipster, hip hop acts. So I would drive from Kansas City to Lawrence, Kansas to see like Common and the Roots, groups like that didn't come to the city, because at that time, the only people coming to the city was like 3-6 Mafia, Bay Area rappers, Too Short, and them stanky leg, do the stanky leg type shit back then. And so if you wanted to hear like some East Coast progressive, non-commercial, at least what we thought at the time, non-commercial hip hop, you had to go to. But anyway, all that to say is I thought that Lawrence, Kansas, KU that Jayhawk was everywhere, and Lawrence, Kansas was the college town to that all other college town. But going to Lansing, Michigan, and here's what's screwed up about Lansing, Michigan. Everywhere you go, you see these monuments to black ball chasers. Like you go in the hotel, and there was like this 20 feet mural of black ball chasers. When they gave us the hotel room key, there was a black football player on there. And so everywhere you go at Michigan State Spartans, and you see all these going back decades, going back to Jim Crow, these monuments to black ball chasers all over this town. And this town and this college and its legacy was built on black athletics. I'm assuming. I don't know. This is just from being there for a week. But then you look at the black people who are there on the ground, and they are impoverished, isolated. I call them the IBMs. When I used to do vending, I'd go all over this country. I'd go to like maybe on a slow year, I'd go to a dozen different cities. On a busy year, we could double that. When we had our little guerrilla media business and traveling all over the country to African arts fairs, African cultural festivals, Odun Day, Africa in April. We weren't living here. We used to come here for the Festival of Life, the Reggae Music Awards, and the African Arts Festival. But we travel all over this country, and everywhere you go, I would see what I call the IBMs, the idle black men. And they weren't always homeless. A lot of black men are in the position. I had an uncle in this position. Like, they live with their mamas. They live with their baby mamas, girlfriends, and they'll be living with their baby mamas, but not in a relationship with the baby mamas. Or live with their aunties, I had a homeboy that stayed with me, and we was in that condition. He was out of jail, recovering from drugs. And the people will say to you, you can stay here. You can come here. You can get a meal. You can get a shower, change your fresh clothes, and you can even rest here overnight. But when I leave in the morning, you got to leave with me. So you can't be in my house when I ain't here because you own that stuff, or you got people after you, all this. So I can't trust you in my house. So they would go out and roam the streets all day. I had an uncle who was on that stuff, on that end. He was a boofer. And that's how my grandma used to deal with him. And she'd be like, okay, come here, get yourself together. I'll say a prayer with you. And then, but when I'm out of the house, you go find somewhere else to be until I get back. So you see just rap. Hey y'all, this is my phone. Oh, this is crazy. Shit is real out here. Okay, how's how y'all doing? Here. Okay, let's hope. Well, this is what happens when you abandon your belief in God, I suppose. Now I'm on my phone. Okay, this is what we have to do. What do you want from me? So my aunt used to say that all the time. Are we on? We getting it? All right. Uh, my computer crashed twice before I went live. That's why I was late going on live. And then and then my mouse froze. And now I rebooted my computer again, but now it's not recognizing the camera. So this is where we are. But like I said, we're gonna get through this. Anyway, all I have to say is it wasn't lost on me that um it wasn't lost on me that seeing all that this town, this university, this athletic community and athletic university culture was built on the brawn of black men, and black men, once they have completed their gladiatorial stint, their gladiatorial duties are just discarded. You have whole towns built on the talent, whole industries, whole communities built on the talent of African people, and African people don't derive any collective or long-term benefits. And notice I didn't say multi-generational wealth, because that's some bullshit hustle they got y'all on. We just keep going for bullshit. But anyway, let me show you some of the nice things I got. All right, so I went to this weird record store. I don't want to say the name of it. The name of the record store was like Fat, Black, and Flat. Weird. But I went in there anyway. And let me say, I got this for my wife. I like to show you. I know. Where's the camera on this thing? I got this for my wife, right? So she's and her sisters are all big Prince fans. I and my wife and her two sisters, they all love Prince. They all talk about Prince, and I noticed she has a few Prince records, but I noticed she didn't have Graffiti Bridge, so I got that for her. And I even think I'm just a placeholder to some 4'8" light skinned dude come and sweep her off the feet. So I'm just a placeholder. But then I got this culture at work. I thought I had most of their CDs. And then when Joseph Hill, when he went solo, I got this, Nice Things, Culture. This is the most expensive thing I bought, by the way. See that $10? Who got money for this kind of stuff? And then I got this. I just got this. Someone got this for a gift for me on cassette. Dred Flintstone and a Modern Tone Age Family. There we go. I love this album. I used to listen to this in high school. It came out, when I was in high school, and my friend of mine bought it and hated it. He was like, "This shit is whack," and I was like, "Oh, I really like it." From the get-go, and I got Sizzler. I'm like, what is Sizzler doing at a used record store anyway? Who would toss out a Sizzler album? So I got just about all of his early stuff, but I don't have all of his later stuff in the 2000s. I have his stuff from the mid to late 90s, from Praise Ye Jah, Burning Up. I have all that, but I don't have the later stuff. So I'm going to start collecting some of Sizzler's later works. And then Pato Banton. So they had a magnificent reggae selection. And so that's what I got at I think it's Fat, Flat, and Black record store in Lansing, Michigan, or whatever. That's, like I said, that $10 CD is the most expensive thing. Now, then I went to the university bookstore, and I was surprised because the university bookstore had a lot of right-wing propaganda, a lot of fascist, pro-capitalist, patriotic, pro-military, pro-imperialist books, which I wasn't really surprised to find like a mainstream Midwestern university because people tend to believe that U.S. universities are bastions of liberalism, but it really depends on what program you take and who is the chair of your program. You know, when I was in Kansas City studying political science, it was a right-wing program that they weren't going to give me a degree. That's why I ended up leaving and going to and finally finishing my degree at Chicago State, because it was right wing, it was reactionary, it was pro-fascist political science program, you know. And then I went to Professor Dima's program, Dr. Dima at CSU. That was a liberal progressive, but it was anti-Marxist, which was very curious. But they didn't like my Marxist. They would call me a Marxist, and they like, you coming here with that Marxist rhetoric. But anyway, I digress. But if you go to the Michigan State bookstore, and they have the dollar bookstore aisle, they have like thousands of old books from graduate programs. And if you look hard enough and you know what to look for, you can bypass all the fascist, pro-military, pro-capitalist, pro-Western books and get you some nice text. So I got this, $1. Each of these books was $1. I have a copy of this. But like I said, my wife, she stay borrowing books. So sometimes I double up, especially if it's a book that she's very fond of borrowing. And I see a copy, $1. I got this book, Manifest Destiny. I don't know if it's backwards to y'all. I don't know how it looked to y'all. Let me see how it looked to y'all. Let's turn this off. They ain't helping me none. Warlande, give me 1 second. Because then we're gonna do this and we're gonna get out of here. I'm not gonna keep y'all long, but I will keep it strong. Let's see. Come on, camera. Stop laughing at my troubles. Oh yeah, it's showing up the right way. Okay, Manifest Destiny. And again, this book I've heard about. I've read several books on Manifest Destiny, so I look forward to reading it. I mean, it's not Howard's End. This is a book, Hunger, A Natural History. I want to get through this fast because I'm losing time. I started late, and now I'm afraid my computer. Hunger, An Unnatural History. Let me see. You see that name? Sharman Apt Russell. I've already started reading this. Extremely interesting. I got 2 copies of this book, The Miseducation of the Negro. I got one for Sekou and one for Aroma, $1 each. So I got 2 copies of this. I don't know if my oldest son has a copy, but if he does, I got 2 copies of that. I got this, which is, I'm looking forward. I've heard of Judith Shapiro. White folks love her. She's supposed to be in the West, outside of China, one of the most preeminent scholars on Mao. And I've always taken issue with a lot of Mao's environmental policies, and I've always felt that the left, the revolutionary left, has not gone hard enough in the paint for the environment, for ecology, for animals, and a lot of Black revolution think it to the level of just mocking or rejecting the animal rights component of anti-capitalism and the commodification of living systems and living beings. So anyway, this is another one, The Dust Bowl, something I read about a lot. I don't think we do enough. Again, we pay a lot of attention on how European colonialism has destroyed cultures, has exterminated or committed genocide or enslaved. But we need to give more attention to how Western imperialism and Western colonialism and capitalism is destroying the environment and ecosystem, and they've been doing it a long time. So the Dust Bowl is a very good segment of history that I don't think gets enough coverage. And then this one is, I left and I was on my way home, and I told my wife, before we drive back to Chicago, I ran back and got this book. It's called Peoples and Empires. See that? A Short History of European Migration, Exploration, and Conquest. And when they talk about European migration and exploration, I know it's gonna be some bullshit, but like I said, if you know the actual history and you know how to decipher right wing speak and you know how to decipher racist raciology, the tricknology. If you know how to get through the tricknology, you can still derive some insights from this. But I'm not going to tear the book down. But I know when people start talking about European migration and European exploration, they weren't exploring, it was an invasion. If some fucking aliens came to Earth and entered the Earth's atmosphere, we wouldn't say, wow, look at those explorers. We'd be like, look at those alien invaders. And that's just who them motherfuckers was. This is a new book. I didn't get this one. These two books I actually bought at a different bookstore. I visited 4 different bookstores, and one of them was like a new age esoteric bookstore. And I'm not saying that it was bad. It's just not my thing. And then the other 3 bookstores are pretty good. All used bookstores. All used, local, independently owned bookstores. Corporate Tiering and How Corporate Power Steals Your Personal Freedom and What You Can Do About It. Don't know nothing about this book. I bought it strictly off the strength of the title. And then A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. So I'm starting to read more about this algorithm. To me, this algorithm, the algorithm's going to kill us all, is more atrocity hobby, personally. That's what I think. But what do I know? But anyway, that's the haul for this visit. Like I said, it was an interesting visit. Shout out to all the progressives. I saw a lot of because if you don't know, Michigan has a very powerful Arab and Palestinian population, and they were very pro-Trump and very pro whatever. And I was thinking about going into the woods and stuff, but I got bitten. I got bitten by a cicada mite, and I had a really bad reaction to it. I'm a dude, I love the woods. I be in the woods, ass rip the crip. We be going out camping and shit. But I'm now, after that getting bit by that goddamn cicada mite, I don't know if I ever set foot in the woods. I'm about to officially become a city boy. Hot dude summer, hot old man summer. And not hot in terms of heat, but hot like how the city girls meant it. Because I can't go through another fucking cicada mite bite. Fuck, that shit was crazy. But I digress. Now, proceeding on. One thing I want to talk about, Lord Jamar, I'm going to talk about it for literally 5 sentences. Lord Jamar went back to Vlad TV. I don't know if y'all know about this, but Lord Jamar called for a boycott of Vlad TV because Vlad said something disrespectful about Farrakhan. And then he went back. Now, I don't care about none of that. Lord Jamar has always been a disappointment because I'm a big fan of Brand Nubian. So, when artists that I like are not the people I wish that I imagined to be, it hurts. But sometimes you hit a lick, sometimes you don't. But beyond that, what was funny was he was sitting in this, he went on to talk about people like me, people who mocked him for going to kiss the ring of Vlad, whom he called a culture vulture. And he was sitting by a pool. And he was like, this is my backyard. And, basically saying, I'm rich, I'm living lavish, I got a beautiful pool with a waterfall in it. And so fuck what you saying. And I'm like, I've never been a 5%er, nation of God and earth, but the motherfucker's on there talking about talking like a 10%er. And he said the whole purpose of going back to Vlad is to teach civilization to the uncivilized. He was saying he's a 5% nation of God's earth, and he's going on this Vlad TV so that he can reach 6 million of his followers to teach. The duty of the civilized man is to teach. You are arm and leg, arm, head. And I self Lord and Master. And he was going there to teach the people, but then he said he ended the video speaking like a fucking 10%er. The bloodsuckers, the capitalists, like, yeah. And then he challenged you. He's like, if you hate on Lord Jamar, he's doing his challenge where he was sitting in front of a beautiful swimming pool, private swimming pool in his backyard with a waterfall. And he said, now you go to your backyard and you do a video from your backyard. And you know, I was to the win because my backyard is an alley where the trash trucks and the crackheads come through looking, you know, to creep on the come up. And I started to do it. But I'm like, let me not do this foolishness, man. Just breaks my heart. I'm still going to bump Punks Up there. I'm still going to bump One for All. You know, and I was even, and now I'm proud to say it. I got a bootleg of the 5% album. And I would used to play the 5% album, Lord Jamar. 5% album. I used to bump that, especially when I was like, I had to drive back and forth between New York and Chicago like 2 or 3 times one year. And I was playing the 5% album bootleg that I got over and over and over. I don't know why. I just wanted to hear it. But I digress. That was weird. But yeah, Lord Jamar is a 10%er. He's a bloodsucker of the poor. You know, and I hope whoever is invested enough do go to their backyard. I'm like, yeah, my backyard is an alleyway. It's not a private pool. But I got Lake Michigan. I should go to Lake Michigan and shoot it. Like, this is my pool, the whole Lake Michigan. I ain't even had, anyway, I was going to do a Q&A today, but now that the thing is messing up the thing, I don't think that I'll be able to because my camera is completely dead. And it's not being recognized by the, but let me see. Let me try one more thing. And if we can, we do a Q&A. But if not, these computer problems, man, what do I do to deserve this? I feel like 40K, Lord. The machine spirit is angry with me. And my wife told me she was going to give this camera to my son because he's got a project he needs a camera for. And she was going to go online and find me a new camera, but this is whack, man. Let's try again. Device not connected. This is freaky. Hold on. Okay. Hold on.
100% connected to TVS takes you TVS the downloads S2 file.
Hold on. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, the other camera's back. I just unplugged and plugged it back in. That's all I did. Anyway, so now I think we can do Q&A. I don't have testing. Okay. All right. What? What do you mean I'm not explaining anything? What do you need me to explain? What is wrong with you? Oh, I hate her. Shot-town, man. We supposed to stick together. Anyway, let's get into the discussion. I just had a busy week. I wanted to share with y'all, but obvious. Oh, you talking about Lord Jamar? Okay, I'm sensitive as hell. Yeah, Lord Jamar believes the earth is flat, and he believes that he stopped men from wearing dresses in hip hop. Oh, Lord Jamar. Anyway, Sadat X is coming out with new music. Go pay attention to Sadat X. That brother seems genuine. Shout out to Sadat X. Of all the brand Nubian, he's my favorite brand Nubian. And Sadat X has kept it real. The wild cowboy still got the style, boy. And so support Sadat X. Let's lift him up. Let's get because it's always the shitty people that get the most. Let's get Sadat X a backyard swimming pool with a waterfall. But anyway, moving on. So what I want to talk about is mutually assured destruction, and we're gonna open up for Q&A. So get your questions. I'll share the link. But here's the thing: Amos Wilson was talking way back in the 1980s about the Cold War. And he said it's insane that two white men, because I think it was Khrushchev, I think it was a summit, nuclear summit. Ray, let me not go off of memory because this guy got on me about something I didn't say. I'll see. The first, what was it? No, it was Gorbachev. So the first nuclear summit between the United States and Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union, the USSR, and black folks, you gotta draw a distinction between Russia and the USSR. I think a lot of young African people will read about revolutionary struggles. They'll read about the Cuban Revolution. They'll read about the struggles, the revolutionary and guerrilla struggles throughout Africa, throughout Asia. They'll read about the Soviet Union and the Viet Cong, or they'll read about the conflict in the Congo and with Patrice Lumumba and him reaching out to the Soviet Union and all that. And so you read and you'd be like, wow, Russia has a very strong history of supporting anti-imperialist, anti-colonial struggles all over the third world. But it's not Russia. It was the Soviet Union. Prior to the communist revolution led by the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks eventually in the White Rebellion or the White War, the Bolsheviks overtook the Mensheviks and led to the assassination of Trotsky, all of that. But prior to the communist revolution, Russia was a monarchy that was not only allied with Europe, but had bloodlines with the Western monarchies. The German, the French, the British monarchs were allied with and kinfolk to, intermarried with the Tsar of Russia. And Russia was an imperialist white nation, even though the majority of people who live in that area would not be classified as white, Mongol, Asiatic, Asian, but Russia has always wanted to be a white Western nation. And so for that brief and glorious time of the Soviet Union, the communist revolution, excluding the Stalin era, but even then, Russia was hostile to the West. When, if you look at Glasnost, Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, and even Vladimir, they made great strides to realign Russia with the whites, with the West, with the capitalists. So when you read about history, you have to, when you look at the actions of Tsarist Russia, the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation of today, those are three distinct nations with three distinct ideology and three distinct missions. And we do Russia disrespect and disservice if we don't make that distinction. So I have to clarify that. But all right, you go all the way back to the nuclear summit in Amos Wilson. So back in the mid and late 80s, there were these series of US and Russia talking to each other. And Amos Wilson said, while these two white men sit across from at a little table in a little room and discuss the fate of the fucking world, these two men do not even represent half of humanity. They didn't even represent 25% of humanity, even though Russia was an enormous country. And he said the whole world, all of Africa, all of Central and Latin America, all of Asia, Southeast Asia, the Australian island continent, we're all sitting there praying that these two white men get along and they work things out, because these two white men who were chosen by a minute minority to be representative leaders are deciding the fate of the world. And Amos Wilson said, this is a disgrace. He said, even if they come out of this and they make peace, they dismantle the loot, the fate of the fucking world should never be in the hand of a person or people or men who represent such a small segment, such a small component of humanity. And he said, it's just crazy. And we sitting around praying. He said that alone, regardless of if you support either one of those factions, regardless of how you feel about either one of them motherfuckers, that alone should cause humanity to rise up. Should cause humanity to rebel. If that is not enough to provoke worldwide revolution, that these two individuals, two statesmen, one of them, we know for a fact at that time, if you read Helen Caldicott and her research, and Reagan was deep in the thralls of Alzheimer's. That's why Nancy Reagan came out with the Christians were staunchly against stem cell research because it kills babies and all that bullshit, because they were using fetal tissue to do stem cell research to address aging and mental deterioration through dementia and Alzheimer's. And Nancy Reagan, who was the queen of the Republican, the gawk queen of the right wing, came out and said, I support stem cell research, because she saw her husband was spiraling down with Alzheimer's. And so one of the motherfuckers in that meeting, I don't know about Gorbachev's mental state, was mentally incompetent. Saying, what we going to do with these nukes? Where we going to put them? Who gets to have nukes? Who can't have nukes? Woo, woo, woo. And so you look back then and you're like, yeah, that's absurd. These two men, you can maybe argue you'd be wrong because Reagan was not democratically elected. Depending on your position on the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev was not even elected. They weren't even, if you look at the Duma, in fact, the Soviet Union had more democracy than the United States. If you look at the Duma, which is the Russian parliament or the Russian Congress, they had a higher turnover rate than the US Congress in election cycles. So if you're judging democracy, which I don't, if you judge democracy by people asserting their demands through the electoral process and being able to select and oust representative officials, the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain, the evil empire, as Reagan called it, was more democratic, had a higher electoral turnover rate than the US in the 80s up until Vladimir came to power. But throughout the reign of the Soviet Union. But I digress. So that was 1985, decades ago. And today we're in even more absurd. We got two more absurd people that we believe, it's not fully true, but we believe that the Shah of Iran, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Donald Trump are now in a three-way engagement that all the rest of the world, from Nigeria to Negro Jamaica, from the Bronx to Brixton, from the North Pole to the South Pole, the whole world is stepping back like, oh, Lord, I hope these men can work it out. These three men that I don't have anything favorable to say about, including the Shah of Iran. Now, let me clarify, and I might have to say this over and over and over. Depends on how you define democracy. I said it was more democratic, quote unquote, democratic than the United States. It had the Soviet Union had higher electoral turnout, but you really define democracy by it's the will of the people articulated and advanced through the government. That's a democracy. If the people want it, will the government give it? So if we look at true democracy versus democratic processes, a democratic process, you can have a democratic process in a non-democratic government, but that's another discussion, Johnny. But everything, just about everything we were taught, people our age, people with gray beards, everything we were taught about the Soviet Union through later research after Glasnost and the opening up of the Soviet Union, everything we learned. Or you just read the scholars, it wasn't even new, because like Michael Parenti, who was going to the Soviet Union through scholarship exchange and intellectual diplomacy and cultural diplomacy, they go there and be like, oh, it's like, this is the Soviet Union? I thought this was some dark, horrible place. But we've all been propagandized. But I digress. Let me get back to the point. So now we have, let me say this before I go on. Iran is in the right. Iran is not engaged in international criminality. Iran is not violating any international law. Iran's military does not occupy any foreign territory. Iran's military is not engaged in atrocities against foreign nations or foreign citizens. In a just world, Netanyahu and Donald Trump and Biden and, well, maybe not Biden, I don't think he's competent to stand trial, but Obama, all living U.S. presidents and all living Israeli prime ministers would be up for international war crimes. The Shah of Iran, or the Ayatollah, the Shah, I'm sorry, somebody gonna get on me. You said the Shah of Iran. That's what they want to bring back to power. They want to bring a new Shah back to Iran. But the Iranian president Iran's in the right. Iran is legally, according to international law, according to UN treaty and international treaty obligations, Iran is doing nothing wrong. But as far as as a matter of principalities, as a matter of principle, I don't support theocracies and I don't support theocrats. So you have a theocratic leader who is absurd. You have a settler colonial genocidal leader in Netanyahu, and you have a Trump. Do I even have to explain a convicted felon sex pest? These three men, a primitive backwards theocrat. And regardless of Iran, as far as the international community, I have no criticisms of Iran and how it's conducting its affairs. I don't. But internally, you just saw that woman that was beat to death by the police because she was out in public not wearing a hijab. And then when the other women came out to protest, and a few men came out to support the women who came out to protest, the mandated wearing of a hijab in public places, that the military and the police opened fire on them, beat them, and incarcerated several of them and gave them long prison sentences. So Iran internally is a regressive theocracy. Absurd. But that does not justify anything. That I don't like talking about Israel, because Israel, that's like trying to talk about how Mississippi or Illinois or how California is behaving independently of the United States. Everything Israel does is sanctioned, supported, funded, armed, validated, and protected by the United States. Israel is a proxy state. Everything Israel does is a crime of the United States. Everything. There's nothing Israel does. Israel is not an independent, it's not a free, it's not even a Jewish state. It is the 51st state of the United States. And the reason why the United States allows Israel to behave, because it gives the United States plausible deniability. The United States gets to play the good guy while its henchmen, United States, Israel, is indistinguishable. That's why it was always absurd for people to talk about the United States is going to be a negotiate. U.S. is going to negotiate between Yasser Arafat, the PLO, and Israel. That's a lie. That's like you having a disagreement with my wife, and you allow me to mediate the disagreement. Yeah, I'm having this dispute with Dr. Mingo, but BroDiallo has so graciously offered his services to mediate the conflict. And after I sit there and mediate, I go and lay my head next to your opponent. You be a fool to agree to that. You be a fool. Can't trust it. But I'm gonna tell you, even if she's wrong, that's why I'm rolling. I just got to get in where I fit in. I'm sorry. So anyway, we got three absurdist people. And even though I think all people who are justice-minded, all people who are critical and independent thinkers, all people who oppose genocide, imperialism, should say, hey, Iran, it's justified. The United States is engaged in a criminal act, allowing its henchmen, Israel, and then directly attacking. But this is absurd. This is unacceptable for humanity. That three national leaders, two nations, can decide the fate of the world. And we've done nothing about it. I remember in the 80s, I actually became active. Really, really active in high school in the late 80s, 89. And when I became active, and the first organization I ever joined was the Stop the Violence Coalition. And it initially was an organization that was oriented around dealing with gang and street violence, and then it moved on to domestic violence and intimate violence. It expanded the mission. That's the first time I was ever out there doing anything that could be called activism, justice, and at that time, the anti-nuke movement, the anti-nuclear movement was in full swing. And there were several organizations. Organization my wife is a part of, Psychologists for Social Responsibility, CSR. Its founding charter was to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And there were several false, and this is my problem with celebrating a victory. This is my issue with celebrating victories before you actually won. Because I was always a full supporter in the anti-nuclear proliferation movement and the peace movement alongside the Black liberation struggle. And I remember when the non-proliferation treaty was signed and they were recalling the nuclear subs, and the Soviet Union was dissolving and negotiating, reducing tensions for nuclear warfare. And the anti-nuke movement, when Ronald Reagan said, tear down that wall, and then George Bush came with his 1,000 points of light speech. And we're finally moving away from nuclear annihilation. We're finally putting the world, bringing and reducing the chance, because the Soviet Union and the United States were the world's two nuclear superpowers, and they were going to destroy each other. And now the Soviet Union is gone. The democracy won, the free market won, liberty won, and the evil empire and is going to embrace. And Boris Yeltsin, that alcoholic absurd, he's the Boris Yeltsin is the Trump of Russia. What Boris Yeltsin did, he even looks like Trump. What Boris Yeltsin did to the Soviet Union, Trump, I hope. It's a little too early to say because there are distinct differences, but look at this motherfucker. If that ain't Trump reincarnated, if this man don't share some genes, they gotta be cousins or something. That motherfucker is a Trump. He just had a better hairstyle. Look at this. Somebody come look at that. Tell me that ain't a Trump. They the same species. But anyway, he was drunk on vodka and signing away all of the progress made through the communist revolution. And we were like, yeah. And I was part of this. I was a part of this. In the mid and late 90s, we were like, we're making headway. Yeah, there are fewer nukes. They're gonna stop nuclear testing. There's a ban on ocean testing, land testing, and see, there was a ban on nuclear testing. And I went to some of those marches, and there were actually some political prisoners who were locked up because they went to nuclear weapon sites and chained themselves to the fence, and they poured their own blood onto the nuke, and they let those people out. And we were like, yes. So between 85 and 95, over the decades, there were negotiation, and because between Nagasaki, Hiroshima for the late 40s up into the early 90s, that was the Cold War. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union was gone. And George Bush gave this speech, said there's 1,000 points of light. And George Bush said there is going to be this thing called a peace dividend. And the peace dividend is because since the Armistice Day, since the end of World War II, and when the Soviet Union, the United States actually executed two U.S. citizens, husband and wife, were executed because they were falsely accused of giving nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union so that the Soviet Union could develop a nuke. And that's a lot in that. But anyway, I can't get it. It's a lot of white knowledge. Let's just try to stay on the surface so we can get to our real point. And so you had this era of the Cold War. I was raised in the Cold War where we had bomb shelters all over. And sometimes if you're in New York, I know, but I don't know other places. If you're walking the streets and you look at an old building and you'll see a radioactivity sign, you'll see the symbol for radiation, right? And I still see them in New York. I don't really see them. I don't really see them outside of New York anymore. But I used to see. I look for them. Where is this one? This one's in Boston. But in all the major cities, had these signs up. Here it is. These fallout shelters. See that sign? Those three triangles touching in the middle. That's the nuclear. That's the radiation. That's the symbol for radioactivity. Like if you go to a radiology department or nuclear medicine department, you go in for a CAT scan, you'll see this sign sometimes around in for medical radiation. That's the sign for radio. But all over the country, they had these fallout shelter signs, and they were selling kits. You could go to Sears. There was no internet, but you could get a catalog. And in that catalog, they would send you this giant drum. And it's just a giant metal tube. And in the back of the metal tube was a pipe that you could attach. And white men all over America were digging these deep ditches in the yard and sticking this big metal tube in there. And then they run a pipe through it up through the ground. And that was a one-way ventilation pipe. And they'd fill that metal tube up with all kind of dried foods and provisions and first aid and iodine pills. And all over this country, if you go buy a house that was made or around in the 50s and 40s, some of these old houses still have bomb shelters in it. And they had us thinking every day of our lives is we're on the brink of nuclear. Testing. Oh my God. Testing. Can you hear me now? It looks like it just came back on. I don't know what's going on. I don't even know when the thing cut off. Muted. Anyway, thank you for letting me know. I bet you put the comments on the thing. It keeps fading. I don't. As far as on my side, the sound looks like it's good. But let me know. Anyway, this is the reality I was raised in. And I've been to anti-nuke marches, demonstrations. I've signed petitions. I've handed out pamphlets. I did everything a poor black kid, fed on government cheese could do to end nuclear war. And black folks used to think I was crazy. But I probably was, because it wasn't just I was very much into animal rights and animal liberation as a kid, and I used to eat all the damn stray animals in the project. I was weird. But all that to say is, almost half a fucking century of it, we've been through this. And in the early 90s, Bush said we're going to have this peace dividend because in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? For almost 5 decades, the United States was under the shadow of nuclear annihilation. And even if we didn't all die of nuclear fallout, we were on the verge of being taken over by the Soviet Union that would take away our identity. They wouldn't just take our freedom. But, the movie The Blob, if you ever see the movie from the 50s, The Blob represents communism and was going to consume all things. The audio is bad. I do need a new mic. This rickety thing. The audio is still bad. I can go back to the phone. I might have to go back to the phone. Because I'm sick of these problems. First world problems. Okay. But so we were living under the threat of nuclear annihilation or communist takeover. Go look at that movie Red Dawn, kind of fools with the United States. And the United States was using the threat of nuclear war against the Soviet Union to justify the expenditure, military expenditures. They used it to justify going into interfering in Jamaica, places you don't even know. Everybody knows about the Vietnam War, the Korean War. Everybody knows, but Jamaica, remember, Jamaica had elected a socialist prime minister. Manley. Bob Marley almost got assassinated behind that. The United States went into Haiti. The United States went into Honduras. The United States went into Panama. The United States was interfering in all over the world to protect the world from nuclear bombs and the loss of freedom and identity. And they were like, that's over now. George Bush said, now we don't have to spend billions of dollars on nukes. We don't have to have this global military. We don't have to interfere with other nations and invade other nations, assassinate other leaders, because now communism is defeated because China didn't count, apparently. But I digress. But this is what motherfuckers are saying. All the U.S. doing all this wicked stuff, they were doing it because the ends justified the means to stop communism. But now we're going to stop with the nukes. We're going to stop with the invasions. We're going to stop with the toppling of governments. We're going to stop with the bombings. And me, myself, and many other people were like, okay, because y'all were doing this shit before the Cold War, and y'all used the Cold War as justification. But okay, but I wanted it to be true, and me and a lot of other people fall for the human fallacy of accepting something to be true because we want it to be true. Not because the evidence, not because of the precedent, but we accept something to be true because we want it to be true, Ibrahim. And we begin to ignore all of the signs, the signals, the red flags that tell us what you're hearing is not true. Oh, I believe it, and it shall be so. And following the end of the Cold War, we were going to be like, now we're going to invest in peacetime technology. And we're going to be a peaceful society. Everybody's going to be able to compete, and everybody will get what they deserve. And that's what Bush put forth this policy platform called the 1,000 Points of Light. And what's funny is, but I can't get into that because my time is getting short, and I'm afraid that things are going to stop. No. But anyway, so we go forward in recent history. The United States said no more invasions because we were trying to stop communism. We wanted to, because they said there's this domino effect. If one nation falls to communism, then the next nation, and all of a sudden the whole world will be communist. But now that the Soviet Union has dissolved and there's no more threat of global communism and there's no more threat of global war, but everything the U.S. said it did to justify communism. Increased invasions, increased assassinations, toppling of governments, economic warfare, military warfare, blockades, sanctions, everything the United States. I tell you what, test. Why you say muted? Everything the United States said that it would stop doing because of the communist threat was over went up, including that nukes. It was all a big fat lie. There were more bombings, more invasions, more toppling of governments, more economic disruption. There was more spending on nuclear power. The United States said that they had to blockade Cuba and put sanctions on Cuba because the Soviet Union was using Cuba as an outpost for communism. It was a communist nuclear outpost. So they had to suppress the Cubans, and the United States, I think we don't really understand. When we talk about, oh, there's an embargo against Cuba, meaning Americans can't go to Cuba and you can't buy Cuban goods here and you can't travel to Cuba and all the Cuban embargo. That's not what the Cuban embargo was. The United States was poisoning Cuba's crops. They were sending a weaponized hoof and mouth disease and other they were weaponizing diseases and killing their crops and livestock. Assassinations, bombings, 9/11 scale bombings. They were funding anti-Cuban. You remember the people, I will vote. There were Cuban. If you were in Cuba and you committed an act of terrorism and killed dozens of people, and if you could make it to the United States would give you sanctuary. Not because you were fleeing oppression and communism, but because you were on the run for committing a heinous crime that killed multitudes of people. That's what it's an embargo. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, Castro was still alive. Castro would say, okay, no more Soviet Union. Uplift the embargo. Stop the CIA's attempts to assassinate me. The United States intensified. It expanded the embargo and intensified its war against Cuba. It was a false justification. And we have more nukes in the world since the non-proliferation. Before non-proliferation, India and Pakistan, two more absurd. You got a Hindu extremist theocracy and another Islamic theocracy that both have nukes. So you have more nuclear armed states. The only country on planet Earth that has honored the non-proliferation treaty and decided to denuclearize itself and surrender its weapon was South Africa. One country out of all nuclear power countries. Australia, France, Germany, UK, United States, Pakistan, Soviet Union, China, to a lesser degree, North Korea, but they say they have nuclear warheads, but they don't really have the technology for delivery outside of it's more of a regional nuclear power, not a global nuclear power. But what the fuck? There's no such thing as a regional or local nuclear power because nuclear fallout does not respect limits, and the nuclear nations are lawless. South Koreans got nukes. I don't know if that was confirmed because South Korea, yeah, I don't think they have the capacity to create a nuke, but I don't think because South Korea is under a defense pact by the U.S. The U.S. is basically guaranteed the existence of South Korea, like the DMZ, and in the case that North Korea invades South Korea. So I don't think South Korea is considered a nuclear armed state. But here's the thing about that. Um, there are a lot of nations that have nukes. Like uh, Israel has never acknowledged that it has nukes. But all that to say, the whole point is none of these nations, none of the promises, all lie. They went from saying the communists are taking our freedoms to the Muslim extremists are taking our freedoms, and they will come up with another one. And now they're saying Iran has weapons of mass destruction. Iran has a nuke, which it doesn't. Iran has obeyed international law in relationship to developing what they call peaceful nukes. That's a whole. I've already said, the United States does not have a legitimate. All that to say, we've made no progress. It's so absurd. If anybody was to say, and I don't like World War III. I don't even like the concept of a world war. I've talked about that before. I might get into that again. But this is absurd. Whether China and the Russian Federation are brought into this conflict, whether Iran is able to secure some level of justice, whether the United States intensifies or withdraws from the conflict, there should be no man on the face of the earth, and even if it was an African head of state, that has the capacity to destroy the planet. There should be no one. And let me tell you one thing. I know a lot of my listeners don't fall into this category, but there's a lot of black folks who do. A lot of us only object to war crimes when we don't like the war criminal. If we like the war criminal, we're willing to overlook or even celebrate war crimes. And y'all know I'm talking about Obama. If Obama had been caught on the carpet, prosecuted for his crime, Trump would do it. If George W. Bush was prosecuted, if Bill Clinton, if George Bush the first, if Ronnie Reagan. So I remember when Obama was in office and he was ordering drone strikes against U.S. citizens and assassinating U.S. citizens and their children. When he was allowing for an intensification of the illegitimate bombings, when he was toppling nations, everybody's talking about, oh, how horrible is it for Trump to engage in regime change in Iran? But a lot of those people ignored or even celebrate Obama's regime change in Libya. So all I'm saying is Trump is not long for this world. That's just human biology, the limitations of the human lifespan. And this is a pendular society. So it goes from one extreme to the next. So when there is some charismatic, a black woman, another black man, or some slick white boy, some slick progressive white boy with pronouns in his bio on social media, when the person we likes takes over the news, takes over control of the military, You got to go harder against the people you support than the ones you don't support. Because you look like a hypocrite even you don't, whether you are one or not. So whether the United States is openly engaged in conflict or not, nuclear weapons should not be allowed to exist. The anti-nuclear movement was pacified by some treaties. The bombs were still there. And there's no one who is intelligent enough, responsible enough, popular enough to have that kind of power. Amos Wilson said a half century ago, it's crazy that we sit around hoping that two random white men, two random theocrats, sitting around praying they don't destroy the world for everybody. The fact that you have the capacity to destroy the world should make you a target. Whether you intend to use it or not, the power should exist. The power shouldn't exist. So I like to open up for Q&A. I have some other stuff to get into, but it's getting late and I've had a lot of technical difficulty. If you got a question, comment, criticism, holler. At your boy. We do need to revive the anti-dopes movement. I think people don't resist because I don't think people look at it in its totality. I don't think it's explained. My mic is going out again. I'm gonna just wrap this shit up. I'm gonna troubleshoot these issues, but my computer's been crashing, audio's been going up. So I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. I want to work on my setup here to see what's going on. But my mouse froze for a while. My mouse wasn't working. And I've been over here unplugging and unplugging things in and out, hoping that would work. It could be the heat. I don't know. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe. Thank you for enduring all of my technical difficulties. And I will, next Monday, I'm going to open up the Q&A with my trumpet. I'm going to start with the Q&A. So I appreciate y'all. I'm a little frustrated because y'all don't even know the trouble I went through. Because before I even went live like 15 minutes late because my computer crashed on me twice. I did some updates and stuff. And I don't know. I'm not sure what the issues are, but I know some techies out there. We're going to work out. Brother's going to work out. So until next time, thank you for tuning in. I'll see y'all next Monday. Tune into and go subscribe to the African World. I don't even know why I still have to say that that's being there for a long. Get a Logitech wireless headset. Okay, I'll look into it. I'm taking notes. Yeah, I learned to. I knew a nerd would pop up, some old lame nerd would come up with some solution. Any more lame nerd advice? Okay. Logitech. Anyway, till next week, BroDiallo broadcast. Like, share, subscribe, do all that algorithmic stuff. Share the BroDiallo show with your friends, enemies, lovers, haters, and imitators. And I will see y'all next week. Again, I appreciate y'all enduring through all the disruption.